Hey, dumpster fire friends. So, we're here to talk today about what we want to do when we have a failing employee. Unfortunately, sometimes we either inherit people or we hire people that don't turn out how we expect. And we need to figure out how to make them be as successful as possible. We're not going to win every time, but there's a lot of things that we can do before we go down a disciplinary pathway or down a removal pathway. There's a lot of things we want to try. We're going to talk about it. So, if you want to lead a high functioning team, you need to make sure that we are creating clear pathways to success for all employees to have every opportunity to either fail or succeed. And we need to let them decide what they're going to do. So, jumping to disciplinary too quickly can create mistrust and fear of making mistakes on the unit. And that's going to make people make more mistakes because they're going to be tripping over themselves because they're scared and then they're getting anxious and then they're not thinking right. So, in order to ensure that you are demonstrating fair and consistent processes for your employees to be successful, we want to talk about how we're going to set them up for success. If you're wondering how to do that, then stick around and keep listening because we're going to tell you exactly what you need to do to help elevate your team to the next level. One of the first things that we need to do is make sure that we clearly articulate what the expectations are. I don't know how many times I've seen staff say, I didn't know I was supposed to do that, or I didn't know how to do that, or I didn't know that you wanted me to XYZ. If we don't clearly say that and write it down somewhere, we're not giving them the best advantage for them to be successful. So communicate that early, clearly, and frequently. And, when you're doing your one-on-ones, AKA, if you haven't figured out how to do a one-on-one, go watch our video about that so that you can figure out how to start these conversations. And that's one of the places that you can have these conversations about expectations.
The next thing is going to be orientation. Review often to ensure it covers all of their critical skills. This is something I've noticed, at least in my experience, is orientation checklists kind of get created and then not looked at for several years. And it's easy to do. There's 1,000 responsibilities that we have, but it is actually important because this can save your bacon. Consider adding things that nurses fail often at. And another thing that I recently did when I was reviewing one of ours is making sure that your Joint Commission or DNV, whichever accrediting body reviews your site, make sure that they are in alignment with those things as well. So that when they come through, you can show evidence of attempting to meet those needs. Extend orientation if you need to. You guys, create an environment where there's no shame in making things a little bit longer, that everybody learns different. Also, cut it short when you need to. Don't make someone do an orientation that doesn't need to, who has experience and can do this, or has experience, but they're still not meeting the bar. Keep them on longer. It's okay.
Also, if you have an employee who it truly is failing and they're not truly passing that orientation in their core skill set, if you let them go and you say, yep, checked it off, and then you go back and you have to try to discipline them because they aren't doing their job correctly, that's going to look really bad for HR because they're going to be like, why did you pass them off on orientation if they weren't safe to be on the unit? So be careful. If they're not ready, don't pass them off as ready. The third thing that is really helpful that you can do when you're dealing with failing employees is really looking at the competencies. And this is slightly different from orientation and education. This is really an assessment of what they are able to do. So make sure that what you're assessing their competence in is going to be reflective to what their core skill set is that they need to be able to do their job. Focus on things that are high risk or low volume, because those are the times that we're going to have some of our more unfortunate events if they don't do it correctly. And that's where patient safety comes into play. And include things on their competency list that you notice as a unit, as a manager, as you're dealing with all your staff, that people frequently miss. Those are things like we had this really awful form in our old ICU that we had to fill out whenever we gave blood, and people missed it all the time. And I can't even tell you how many times we did education. And so if you might want to do a competency on that before you can give blood, you have to prove to me that you know how to do this skill. And it might sound stupid, but that truly is the best way to assess if they do know how to do that thing.
And the next thing that you want to consider is mentorship. How can you create an environment where it's, whether formal or informal, that creates a buddy system? If they're struggling, like, hey, I want you to run your thoughts through your mentor. I'm going to make sure you're scheduled with them, or we can at least 1 or 2 times a week that you can have that time with them. Create an environment where they can actually verbally walk through their process with an experienced nurse. For example, we had an employee that was doing that, and you put her with one of our really experienced nurses who had a similar workflow
Yes.
and like brain processing. They were
Yes.
very similar in that.
Yeah, we had an employee who was very bright but was really struggling with her time management. And we had another nurse who'd been an ICU nurse for like 30 years, and she was brilliant, but she was a chaos storm, and nobody understood her system except for her. And I just like had this feeling that they would be a good match for each other, and that the newer nurse who was struggling with that could really benefit from this other nurses to understand her processes and how she still makes sure that she gets things done. And so I worked with, I wasn't even a manager at the time when I made took on this initiative, but I went to the manager and I went to the unit scheduler and I went to the mentor and the mentee, and I was like, "Hey, I think that this could work and help everyone feel successful." And everyone bought into it strangely by the power of, the spaghetti monster or whatever. And it all worked out, and that person was able to really mentor her and help her go from feeling, I think it wasn't that she was incompetent, but she had such self-esteem issues and anxiety that was really preventing her from being successful. And that other person, where she could see and identify with her, gave her that confidence to be able to show up and actually be a really good nurse.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. So, another option that you have with a failing employee is to look for strategic growth opportunities. Teresa did a really awesome example of this one time when we were having a little bit of a bump in our CLABSI rate in the ICU. Do you want to tell them about that experience, Teresa?
Yeah. So Sandy and I actually were reviewing our collapses, the specific ones on the specific patients, and we kind of looked at the charting. Her and I actually both did this. She looked at one, and I had looked at one. And lo and behold, there was a consistent nurse that happened to be taking care of these patients. So, what I did is I actually went through and asked that nurse, "Hey, I need a favor. Our CLABSI rates are climbing. We're not looking great, but I know that you have access to resources and things to create a really great education topic for this. Can you identify what the nursing interventions are that will reduce the risk of CLABSI? I don't care about what insertion things are, all the other things that's not something we can control, but I want you to look into those. And then I want you to create an in-service that you can share with the other staff." So now this person becomes an expert in this area, and now the person that was causing the problem became the solution. And that is a tricky way to get people engaged when their areas of weakness can become their areas of strength, because they didn't realize that some of their own actions were actually the reason we were having an issue. And
Yeah,
we
and
had
I
another one that we did also.
Yeah, and I think back to Teresa's example and this nurse, I think when she had him go through and look at all of these cases and he saw the same trend that we did, and he realized on his own without anyone having to tell him that he was probably a contributor to that situation. And I think that meant more to him than probably if we had said, "Hey, you screwed up, man, and you suck."
You're the problem.
Yeah. So we
Even though
had
that is what we thought and felt. You just don't say that. That's not helpful.
Yes, and that was way more meaningful to him and the staff around him. We had another employee that really struggled with organization. And again, we're in an ICU. Any ICU nurse is going to tell you that we care ridiculously amounts of energy about how to organize your lines from your IV pump to your patient, whether it's labeled and whether it is clean and yada, yada,
Whether
yada.
your room's clean, whether your space is clean, all of the above.
ICU nurses are notoriously OCD about this, and it's just part of the nature. But this particular nurse was in the ICU and he was really struggling with it. And so I gave him a project to go ask the unit staff what did they feel like the standard of care was for our ICU. How do they define that? What is it like when you leave the end of your shift and you're handing off your patient to the next person? What does that look like that would be the best possible situation? Essentially, what patient did they want to receive from you?
Yeah, the question we actually had him ask was, who is it that you like to get report from and
Mhm.
why? because
Yes.
what is it about that person that gives you the
Mhm.
patient that you know you're going to have a good shift now?
Yep. And so he didn't just go to all of the most experienced nurses. He went to all of the nurses. He literally asked every single person. So this even became more amazing than I even intended it to. So he went and asked every employee what was important to them. He came up with a huge list of things, from organizing your lines to cleaning the patient to making sure the room was organized, all these things. And then we had a unit shared governance committee. He brought it back through shared governance. Everyone got to evaluate it. It got weighed in, it got reevaluated. So everyone on the unit at this point has made a contribution to what is it that we feel like is the right way to take care of a patient. And I didn't tell them any of it. They defined it themselves. And then at the end of that project, they created a pledge, and everyone on the unit took a pledge that said, I pledge to take care of a patient in this way, and I'm going to uphold to these standards of care. And it was really cool because it really helped those people who were maybe struggling with some of those things because they didn't feel like it was that big of a value to them personally. When they realized it was a value to everyone else around them and they understood why it was a value to them, they were able to take ownership of that and actually get buy-in themselves. So it was a pretty cool thing to watch.
Right. And that nurse grew a lot from that. So, another thing you can do is consider changing the shifts. What do we need to do to address this? So, for example, a night shifter is working a day shift and they keep coming in late, and maybe they need to not be going back and forth. Maybe we need to figure out a way to make this not work. Maybe you have various shifts, or what if you only have one set of shifts? Maybe you can find ways to work at slower paces. Talk to them about what is it that we need to do? Do you need support? What is it that we can address? These are again the one-to-one questions and moments that you touch base with your staff and learn them and figure out what is the problem.
Yeah, what are their barriers to being successful? You want to keep engaging them to help them come up with these solutions. Another tip on how to help your failing employee is to frequently check in with them. You need to be always coming in and saying, how's things going? What's the progress? You should have already identified the expectations. You should have created some goals with them. You should have had them come up with some solutions to their barriers. And then you need to be circling back with them on a regular basis. So that might be weekly, but at least probably biweekly or monthly. If you're not checking in with them, you don't know how things are going from the outside. You want to always help them identify their successes with their improvements. So you don't want these one-to-ones to just be telling them all the things they're still doing wrong. You really need to try to hone in on those things that are making them feel successful. If you have a child and they're coloring a picture and you can say, hey, those colors are so bright and so awesome, that kid's going to light up and they're going to want to go color 10 more pictures for you. But if you come in and you're like, hey, you don't know how to color in the lines and your coloring is not very good, that kid might feel pretty defeated and not want to ever do it again. So you want to try to hone in on those successes whenever you can, as much as you can, more than the negatives if you can. Try the phrase, how can I support you to be successful? And then every time you have these meetings, you always want to follow up with an email for documentation. Because again, if this employee doesn't make it through this phase, you are going to want to document. You're going to want to see this trail of all the things that you did to try to help them be successful. Because when it comes to HR, they're going to want to they're going to want proof that you did your due diligence to make sure that this employee could be successful.
Yeah, exactly. And part of that also is making sure that you put them on performance improvement plans and that you are involving HR and communicating with them where you're at so that if this kind of starts to snowball, that you have already included them in some of this. And then typically these performance improvement plans are going to focus on specific goals. So make sure that you do that.
And the last thing to keep in mind is that you want to make sure that you're being fair and consistent with every employee. So don't do this whole process with one employee and then let another one slip through the cracks. Or don't miss this piece and then pick another person that you say, I'm going to really help you be successful. Make sure that you're giving everyone the same opportunity.
And one other point, remember, it takes 7 positives to every 1 negative for someone to feel like they're still valued.
Good
I've
point.
heard that. I don't know where that comes from, but I've
Yeah.
heard it several times.
Well, it sounds useful. And I think it's probably true. I would rather hear 7 things that you say positive about me than 1 negative.
Well, and then when you are giving that negative feedback, it really lands because most of what you say is not negative, right?
So true.
So when you're bringing something up that's important, they're like, oh, I should work on that.
Yep. So quick rundown on everything we just talked about, on what you need to do to help your failing employee be as successful as you can. And after this, if they're not successful, they have either deemed themselves as a success or a failure, and then you need to go to the next step. You need to make sure that you have set clear expectations, that you have given them an appropriate orientation, that their competencies are relevant. You want to make sure you've given them opportunities for mentorship. Give them strategic growth opportunities, perhaps. Consider changing their shifts if that shift that they're doing is setting them up for failure. Check in frequently and always document. Maybe put them on a performance improvement plan. You're going to want an HR involved for that. And then make sure that whatever you do, whatever your process is, that it's fair and consistent and you're doing it the same with every employee. So,
thanks for watching.
Like and subscribe so you can keep on listening to new tips and tricks for new nurse leaders and old nurse leaders and anyone on the journey. We're here to help you.